Our next speaker, we wanted to do something also very specific to the issues which we're dealing with here in New York from a, dare I say, minority standpoint. So Amy Khoshbin comes to us having graduated from the NYU Tisch School. She is a practicing performance artist as well as an installation artist. And going to what David said, a lot of her work addresses specifically the use of narrative, such as the myth of Layla and Scheherazade. She's worked with a lot of different installations in order to recount or to revise the narratives which have placed either women or, in her case, Iranian American women into certain subject positions which she finds no longer tenable. So I will give her the floor. Thank you very much for being here, Amy. I'm hoping that that was a good introduction. Awesome.
Hello. How is everybody? Alive? Good? Okay, cool. Thank you for the intro, Brooke. So yeah, I wanted to cover today a couple of different, we're going to do a little tech thing of figuring out how to do this for one quick sec. There's a waiting screen. That's cool. You don't have to see what's going on. Okay, how do you do play from start? Yes. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. So I am, as Brooke mentioned, an Iranian-American, Brooklyn-based artist. And since even before Trump, honestly, there's been a lot of concern on my end in regards to Iranian Americans living in the U.S. and potential future war, potential conflict with that area that I think has been sort of in the makings now, I would argue maybe for years, but obviously since Trump has been in office with the Muslim ban that we saw as one of his first executive orders, that then there was a stay, Ye being at JFK and doing all of that amazing work, which I've been very involved with direct action activism since the election, and also way back in the day when I was more in undergrad and college. But I've been very energized by what's been happening. I think a lot of people here probably are feeling similar. And I know a lot of people in my community who have never protested before have been out on the streets a lot. So for me, these issues of the Muslim ban in particular, along with obviously a lot of the other ACA, Planned Parenthood, LGBTQ, women's rights, the environment, I mean, it's just like the list goes on and on. It's crazy. But in particular, I have interest, and you're seeing an image from my piece, The Myth of Layla. I have interest in the sort of fear-mongering that's been happening against the Middle Easterner in our culture now for a while. This is an image also from The Myth of Layla, which is this terror alert level system that I created as part of this sci-fi allegory I wrote. And what's crazy about it is I wrote this sci-fi allegory 2 years ago when I was in residence at Lower Manhattan Cultural Council and the Watermill Center. And the narrative is about a near future where the U.S. is run by a big brother media conglomerate called The Network, and the head of the U.S. is a reality show host. So that's weird. And yeah, and also in this narrative, the U.S. is at war with a Middle Eastern country akin to Iran. I called it Urania in science fiction tradition, so you can sort of cover a lot of issues in the Middle Eastern topic, if you would say. So there's issues of refugees, there's issues of war and how that breaks a country apart, etc. So in this narrative, and here's some images from the installation I did at Mana Contemporary in the fall, and then subsequently at Nurture Art in Brooklyn. In this narrative, the head of the network, the host, invites Layla, who I perform as, which is an autobiographical representation of my life, She is an Iranian American who is living in the US and is against the war that's going on. So she makes a video that goes viral online, and she gets asked by the network to go on their new reality show called Activists in Sexy Solidarity, ASS, which I could also maybe see that happening soon. There's all of this sort of like aesthetics of protest. What are we wearing? You know, this is becoming part of the culture. So the staging for the installation and performance was the set of Activists in Sexy Solidarity. So it was a participatory multimedia performance where you would enter into the space, and we actually chose every performance for people at random from the audience who would then represent their cause through different challenges, sort of a la RuPaul's Drag Race. So in this narrative, we flip back and forth between these ideas of mass distraction that we see happening in our sort of entertainment and celebrity-obsessed culture today, and mass destruction, which are missives coming from the host about the war that's raging. And the two sort of meet in the middle. At some point, Layla's father gets accused of terrorism, and she sort of has to grapple with her political ideals to save her father. And in the end, unfortunately, she ends up having to go with the network to, and this is, I think, a thing a lot of us are dealing with. How do we work within the system, and how do we work outside of it, and what are some successful strategies for both? The whole piece, so here's some images from that. Here's the host and Donald Trump side by side. So the piece is very much sort of futuristic. There's a lot of imagery, there's a lot of humor, because I think for me that's a strategy that I claim in my practice as a methodology for dealing with political content. I find political content, obviously, it can be very heavy-handed, and especially in an art and a fine art context, how do we engage, and I think outside of a fine art context as well, how do we engage communities using strategies from everyday life to get people excited about these issues? For me, a big one is humor and showmanship, entertainment, color, aesthetics, and you see a lot of that in the work I'm trying to do here. So after the show, after the shows, this is Nurture Art, we would hold political conversations. So the installation ran from September 25th through November 12th, and then I did a pop-up installation post-election at Nurture Art. This is an image from the political conversation we had afterwards. And the dialogue was obviously very emotional. As you said, everyone is kind of up in arms about the situation that's going on. And I realized that, and Brooke mentioned it too, we're living in sort of an echo chamber, at least for me, being an artist in New York, specifically a performance artist. It's very niche, the worlds that we run in some ways. And so in that moment that we had the political conversation, it was a wonderful conversation, but it was very much preaching to the choir. So the question became, how do we reach and create a cross-cultural dialogue? How do we reach outside of this bubble? So then I am now, I pose that question to a lot of friends of mine, including Leila Nazemian, who used to work with Brooke at Layla Heller Gallery and now works at another organization called Culture Runners, which their mission, they're part of Edge of Arabia, which is another organization, but their mission is to bring Middle Eastern artists cross-country in an RV with a camera crew. So I am now partnering with this organization, Culture Runners, and we are planning a tour to bring the myth of Layla to small town America. Our first leg of the tour will be happening in upstate New York, places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, Canton, Ohio, Peoria, Illinois, all the way through Michigan. So we're kind of going to tackle the Rust Belt. We're trying to perform this outside of art spaces. So we're trying to perform it in community centers, community theaters, schools. Part of the performance that you saw, so there's this videography component. So in every performance, we're actually shooting a live reality show, and it gets documented. And all of the projections, actually, you're seeing them being, all the cameras, rather, you're seeing them being projected large scale live. So in a dramatic moment, you would all zoom in on one character's face, for example, and you play with the dynamics of media creation and the power hierarchies. How does a low angle create a hero, or a high angle create someone that's helpless? So the idea in taking this cross country also is to work with youth in every city to do a workshop around these ideas of media creation, and they will actually perform as the videographers for the piece. So trying to create engagement in different ways with the piece, and to have them bring in their community then as well to see and engage with the performance. This could be a total failure. And I'm sure, you know what I mean? It's like you're listening to this, you're like, what? You're going to bring that to Middle America? Good luck. Because I hear you. So is it going to be a success or not? And this is really, I think, so for me, part of this is a conduit. This project is a conduit to make a documentary about bringing this Middle Eastern, Iranian American experimental artist's work through Middle America and trying to have a political dialogue across these cultural borders. Is that possible? Is that a total failure? Is it waiting for Guffman, or is it something else, you know? And so I think that for me is really an exciting project in talking about this listening strategy and actually doing interviews with people and actually painting a picture of what are these cities like, you know, that we don't know. So that's one project. And really quickly, because I know I don't have a ton of time, another project for me, and I've never really engaged with political action and art making in one fell swoop so directly before. I worked with the writer Ann Carson, who's written things like Autobiography of Red, Beauty of the Husband, etc. She's an incredible poet and writer. And I asked her, as the election was happening, to respond to the socio-political climate with a series of phrases. I then translated those phrases into large-scale banners. So this one's 120 inches wide, and so these pieces have been used both in institutions and outside in the street. So the first phase of this project is called Word on the Street, was at NYU's Kimmel Galleries around the inauguration. So we had the banners hanging up at NYU, and then we took them down for the protests that were happening that weekend, the Inauguration Day protest, the Women's March, and this is a picture from me marching with it in the Women's March, and then we put them back up in the gallery after the project was or after the protests happened. And so the idea is also to try and collapse that border between the street and public action and public access and the institution, and to try and have both, and to sort of cultivate that morphic resonance, honestly, and residue of the street, and bring that into the institution to create a dialogue there. So here's another one. This is 12 feet tall. Action comes from the backbone, not the wishbone. This is To Alert is to Alter, that was used in the Women's March in DC. And part of this project is also social practice. So around the inauguration, as I mentioned, we also hosted a banner making workshop as part of the opening, in trying to engage these communities that aren't normally engaged with political action. So a lot of my friends in the art community, they've never been to a protest, for example, which to me, I'm like, what? But yeah, they've never been to a protest. And so I really wanted to energize that community around these big marches that were happening, so they felt like they had a group to march with, so they felt they had a place in this new political landscape that we're now embarking on. So we did wearable sashes and banners, and then people took them out into the streets for protest. And these are some of the signs, and she made that wearable woman's symbol around her neck that was part of a cape. And also, we really encouraged capes, so being superheroes and kind of running around with wearable materials, because you don't necessarily want to be holding something all the time. You want to just be arms free and able to move and mobile. So those are a couple of the projects. I wanted to quickly also, I'm skipping that because I'm inspired by the Italian futurists, but then it's like they were fascists, so skip that slide. But I also wanted to talk really quickly, and I know I'm speaking to an art audience, but Dadas and Dadaism. For me, Hugo Ball, the Cabaret Voltaire, Hugo Ball is a big inspiration for me, and you're seeing an image of him in one of his costumes, and I use some of those aesthetics in my piece, The Myth of Layla. That's the host you're seeing there next to that. Because Dada, and I'm sure, I mean, does everyone here know what Dadaism is? Okay, obviously. Um, you're like, yes. But just as a refresher, I think it's interesting to remember that they were around from 1915 to 1923, both in Europe, really active in Germany, and under a fascist regime during World War I, and then here in New York as well. And their whole thing was artistic revolt and protest of traditional beliefs. And there's a really good quote that Hugo Ball made around Cabaret Voltaire that I think is really interesting, which is, Cabaret Voltaire, the idea behind it is, quote, to remind the world that there are people of independent minds beyond war and nationalism who live for different ideals. This was in 1916. So these struggles have been going on for a long time, both within the artistic community and outside of the artistic community. I think it's really a pleasure and honor to be here tonight because maybe we're seeing the beginning of a coalition building. I know for me, who's been protesting a lot as an individual and using social media as a place to gain and share information, it's interesting and exciting to think about direct action response teams and different subcommittees that could potentially be organized out of this group in terms of first responders, et cetera. And as a final thing, just to close, so the next project that I'm embarking, and Word on the Street is actually an initiative that I want to keep going. So I'm working with my siblings who are in an art production team called House of Trees. Some of you know Noah Khoshbin and my sister Jennifer Khoshbin. We're trying to partner artists with writers and musicians to continue this practice of connecting creatively to respond to the political environment and to be able to create materials that can be used both in the street and in institutions through exhibition. So that is an ongoing project. And the next project that I'm working on is I'm pretty sure I'm going to be running for city council in District 39. Woo! Vote for me. Where Brad Lander used to be, but will be finishing his term. We're lucky to have a really leftist person in office there. He is, this is District 39, for those of you that don't know, is sort of Gowanus, Carroll Gardens, Red Hook, Cobble Hill in Brooklyn. And for me, it's twofold. I have been really wondering about how to get more active and involved. And I think for me, this is sort of a first step in that process. I also consider it part of an artistic practice, an artistic and performative practice. For me, exploring the performative and aesthetic approaches and strategies that politicians use in campaigning, because I find that very interesting, especially right now with Trump. I hate saying his name, but whatever. The fact that he's able to be in office we're in a very surreal time right now. And I know Tanya Bruguera, who's an incredible artist, is also running for office, as well as there's an artist curator in Detroit running for mayor. So I think this is an interesting thing that we're seeing crop up right now. I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, this is also an information gathering strategy. So we can sort of tackle this supposedly complex or actually complex structure that's in place in government, in local government, and how do we enter into it as individuals to encourage more people who are creative practitioners to get into this space. So that's the deal. But I would love to connect with anybody. My contact information is here if you can't see. It's tinyscissors.com is my website. @tinyscissors is my Instagram, and tinyscissors@gmail.com is my email if you'd like to contact. One thing that I would like to bring to the table also is that, and this is not like a creepy thing, but I think in the art world it often is seen as such. I'm seeking funding for all of these projects, and I think it's an interesting place to be in making political work? Where are the institutions and the individuals that we can look to when making this work to find support? And that is something I would just like to bring to the table, because grant applications, as we know, the cycles are quite long, and if the projects are a direct response, how can we actually get these things funded quickly, in a way that we can respond to what's happening around us directly? So I'll end on that, and we can discuss that more, but thank you so much for your time.